What about when approaching a job? If someone truly comes to a point and they have 2 job opportunities, they've gone through the criteria, you know, it's a certain many miles from work, or it's this, and they're really at an impasse. They really don't know which way to go. Is there a way to help them break that tie?
Yes, once you, because sometimes you do end up with 2 alternatives that they seem both pretty good.
Like, well, this got this, and this has this, but you know, and either one you could live with, but you're like, now what do I do?
That's
you
right.
know?
So the big question people need to ask themselves if they have 2 things that seem equally valuable or workable is, what might be the unintended consequence of this alternative? What risk am I taking? And this is kind of looking down the road, because everything that I do makes something else happen, or something else might happen, and I have to look at that. So if I have 2 things that seem very similar, is there more of a risk in some way with this than that? So I
2 years, 5 years down the road, something like that. You know, will the company still be there, or will my position, or would I be a chance to lose my job? That type of thing.
There are other kinds of things that need to be looked at, and that's the biggest one. Unintended consequence. What might happen if I do this? What's the downside, so to speak? There's a lot of different ways to say it. The downside, the risk, the unintended consequences. That's kind of looking to the future and seeing beyond just this immediate decision that I'm making. Exactly.
Well, let's say you finally make a decision. How do you stop, not you personally, but how does someone stop themselves from revisiting that? Did I make the right one? I don't know. You know, they finally make it, whew, they feel good for about an hour or 2, and then they're like, okay, did I make the right one? Did I, you know, and they keep going back and think, how do you say, be happy with the decision, move on? Or, I mean, is there some ways and some things people can do to kind of just shed it and say, I made it, it's done, move on?
Well, some of that's a personality style.
Yeah, that's true. Many personalities can say,
for better or worse, that's a personality style. But the other part of it is to actually go through a process with yourself. To be honest up front is to set some criteria. Because you'll make a decision and then you'll say, I wished I thought about that. I needed to consider that. Oh, darn, I wished I had known that. But you would have known it if you had sat down and been very honest about what the expectation was.
Kind of laid it out ahead of time.
You have to lay it out. If you don't do that, even if you're doing this all by yourself, then you're bound to be disappointed. But you know what? The only reason we call it a decision is because there are choices. And when you look at it immediately, all the choices seem good in one way or another. And so it's about being honest, laying out your criteria, sort of valuing it, deciding what's important, and then running with it. Because the truth is, you don't get everything. You don't make all and say you don't get it all. That's right. I'm going to get what's most important to me. I'm going to get the most of what I really want. But I'm going to lose something else because of it. Sometimes I don't make a decision. I see alternatives and I say, I want that because that is so obviously better than everything else. So
those are the great ones, because you can just feel good about that and never have to revisit it. You know?
I don't even call that a decision. I say, oh, well, that's obvious. But the truth is, there were alternatives there, but they just fell away. That's right. But it's only when I have things that seem to be so equally valuable.
And that's the tough decisions. And then you always want to go back and say, should I? You know, there's so many times that everybody says, oh my gosh, that was the worst decision I ever made back then. Or, you know, relationships or whatever the case may be. But, you know, I always like to say, or people say, you know, infamous statements, you know, well, it was the best decision that you knew at the time. Or that you could make at the time. You know, you thought it was the right decision, then you can't go back and beat yourself up for some of that.
No, not if you've thought it through and if you've laid out the criteria. You can't, because you've got the best. It was the best you could do. There'll always be something to be lost. You won't get everything, and that's why you call it a decision.
And that's why we call it life.
That's why we call it life and a decision. That's right.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much for helping us today talk about problem solving and some approaches, and decision making and some of the difference between the two. So we really appreciate your time and helping us understand that. So
thank you for having me. This was great.
You're very welcome. And I thank our audience for joining. I'm Cindy Keynes, and I wish you the best of luck with your problem solving and decision making.